Mr. Cole has not satisfied condition 1. James Whitaker's voice was quiet. That made it worse. Across the walnut conference table, my son stared at the blue folder between us as if it had teeth. Tessa gave a small laugh. Not a happy sound. More like a woman testing whether the room still belonged to her. "That old thing?" she said. Daniel kept every paper he ever touched. Ruth Alvarez slid one bank statement toward the center of the table. $18,740. The number sat there in black ink. Evan didn't touch it. Then James turned one page in the trust document. "There are still 3 conditions left to discuss," he said. 3 months earlier, Tessa had called me just the bookkeeper, and my son had let her. I was 62 years old when I learned that people could erase your life without ever raising their voice. They could do it with a chair, with a password, with a meeting invitation that never appeared in your inbox, or with one sentence said lightly enough that everyone else could pretend it had not hurt. Cole Custom Woodworks had been my life for 37 years. Not in the sentimental way people mean when they say a place feels like home. I mean literally. The shop had paid our mortgage. It had bought Evan's school shoes. It had covered Daniel's hospital bills when his back gave out in 2008. It had kept our lights on during the recession, when half our commercial clients vanished, and the other half took 90 days to pay an invoice. Daniel made things beautiful. I made sure we could afford to keep making them. That was our arrangement from the beginning. He could stand at a workbench with sawdust in his hair and turn a crooked board into a dining table someone would pass down to their children. I sat in the office with Daniel's brass-tipped mechanical pencil, the one he'd pressed into my hand, the day we signed the shop lease, joking that a woodworker's wife needed her own tool, a cup of coffee gone cold beside my elbow, and made certain every employee got paid on Friday. Neither job mattered more. That was what Daniel always said. "Wood doesn't leave the shop without your numbers," he would tell me whenever someone called me his secretary. I still had that pencil. It was in my cardigan pocket the morning everything started. The showroom meeting had been called for 9 o'clock on a Thursday. By 8:50, the production floor was already alive with the sounds I had known longer than some people know their own heartbeat. The table saw screamed. A planer coughed out curls of maple. Someone in the finishing room had an old country station playing too loud. I stood in the hallway outside the conference room with a stack of vendor statements pressed to my chest. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. I remember noticing a thin strip of sawdust caught in the seam of my left shoe. Funny what your mind holds on to when something is about to break. Inside the conference room, Evan stood near the windows beside a display panel of white oak samples. He was handsome in the way Daniel had been at that age. Dark hair, broad shoulders, a serious face that softened whenever he talked about design. Tessa sat at the end of the table in a cream-colored blazer, with a tablet open in front of her and 3 different color palettes spread around it. Warm beige, soft black, brass, everything about her looked polished. Even her anger, when it came, always looked polished. The contractor, a man named Glenn Harper, had brought preliminary numbers for renovating a storefront downtown. Tessa wanted to turn it into a flagship showroom, not just a place where clients could look at samples. A statement. That was her word. A statement, she had said at least 4 times already. Glenn tapped the estimate with one thick finger. The build-out is doable. But if you want the custom lighting, the stone flooring, and that glass wall system, I'll need a substantial deposit before my crew starts. How substantial? I asked. Tessa's eyes flicked toward me. Glenn checked his notes. $42,000 to lock in labor and materials. Then the rest gets scheduled by phase. I put the vendor statements on the table. Before anyone locks in $42,000, I said, we need to discuss the outstanding supplier balances. Evan's shoulders stiffened, just slightly. But I saw it. Tessa leaned back in her chair. Marianne, we're talking about growth. We're talking about spending money we don't currently have. We have it, she said. No, I answered. We have invoices coming due. Glenn looked down at his papers. Smart man. Luis Moreno, our foreman, had passed the open doorway on his way to the floor. He slowed when he heard the tension, but he kept walking. Luis had worked for us 22 years. He knew when a family argument was about to become a business problem. Tessa turned her tablet so Evan could see the rendering on the screen. It was beautiful. I will give her that. Floor-to-ceiling windows, floating shelves, long communal tables under pendant lights, a wall of finished walnut panels with our company name in brushed brass. It looked like the kind of place people photographed before they bought anything. It would change how clients see us, Tessa said. We're not some dusty little shop anymore. My throat tightened, not because she was entirely wrong. The world had changed. More people ordered online. Big firms wanted presentation decks, clean branding, beautiful showrooms. I understood that. I had never wanted Cole Custom Woodworks to stay frozen in 1988. But there was a difference between changing and pretending. What does the cash flow projection say? I asked Evan. He didn't answer right away. His eyes went to the windows. Outside, Luis was guiding a young apprentice through the safe use of a bandsaw. The apprentice's hands were trembling. Luis kept one hand near the machine, not touching the boy, just ready. Evan finally said, "We can make it work." "That isn't what I asked." Tessa's smile came and went. "Marianne keeps the books," she said to Glenn, like she was clarifying something harmless. "Evan makes the decisions now. We need a real owner's answer, not another bookkeeping question." There it was. The sentence. Small enough to deny later. Sharp enough to stay. For a second, nobody moved. My son looked at me. I waited. I did not need him to yell. I did not need him to humiliate his wife. I only needed him to say, "That's not fair. My mother built this place too." He rubbed the back of his neck. Then he looked down at Tessa's showroom rendering. "We'll review the numbers," he said. "Not we'll review them with Mom. Not Marianne has a point." Just the safest sentence in the room. The contractor packed up his papers 10 minutes later. Tessa walked him out, talking brightly about permits and timing. Evan stayed behind at the table, standing over the rendering. I wanted to say something cruel. I wanted to tell him that his father would have been ashamed. But grief can make you use the dead like a weapon, and I had promised myself I would never do that to Daniel. So I picked up the vendor statements. "Are you planning to show me the projections?" I asked. Evan exhaled through his nose. "Mom, if I stop to stare at every bad number, I'll never be brave enough to build anything." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Bravery isn't refusing to look." He didn't answer. He walked out of the room, leaving the rendering behind. I stood there alone in the conference room with the estimate, the overdue statements, and the tiny brass pencil resting against the side of my hand. That was when I understood something I had been trying not to understand for nearly 2 years. They did not see me as a partner anymore. They saw me as an obstacle. And the worst part? For the first time since Daniel died, I was beginning to wonder whether my own son did too. The first invoice arrived the following Monday. Not by email, not through our accounting system. It came in a thick white envelope addressed to Cole Custom Woodworks, marked Final Notice in red across the front. I found it on the reception counter between a stack of catalogs and a bowl of peppermints nobody ever ate. For almost 30 years, I had been the person who opened every piece of mail that came through that door. I knew the difference between a routine statement and a problem before I broke the seal. This was a problem. The invoice was from Carolina Hardwood Supply. Amount due, $18,740. Terms, net 30. Days overdue, 47. I read it twice. Then I went looking for Evan. His office used to be Daniel's. That was still difficult for me to say out loud. Daniel had kept that room simple. A scarred oak desk. 2 framed photographs. One of Evan at 6 years old, holding a birdhouse he had built with a crooked roof. The other of the entire shop crew standing around the first conference table Daniel ever made. After he died, Evan repainted the office dark gray. He replaced the old desk with a sleek black one. He added a low leather couch and a wall of floating shelves for design awards, sample books, and small pieces of furniture he had made himself. It was handsome. It also looked nothing like Daniel's office. Evan was sitting behind the desk with his phone pressed to his ear. He raised one finger when I walked in. I waited. On the corner of his desk sat 3 unopened manila folders. Each one had a quarter written across the tab in my handwriting. Q4 2024, Q1 2025, Q2 2025. The edges had gathered a thin layer of dust. I watched my son notice where I was looking. Without saying a word, he pulled the folders toward himself and stacked a catalog on top of them. He finished his call. "Glenn can start demolition in 3 weeks, he said, "if we get him the deposit." I held up the invoice. "Carolina Hardwood Supply says we owe them $18,740. Tessa is handling vendor payments. Is she?" He leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked softly. "Mom, no, answer me. His mouth tightened. It was Daniel's mouth when he was trying not to lose his temper. Tessa has a system. Then why are they sending a final notice to the front desk? He looked past me at the window. Below us, 2 delivery trucks were backed up to the loading dock. Luis stood near the first one, checking lumber quantities against a clipboard. He wore the same faded brown work jacket he had worn every winter for as long as I could remember. "Cash gets tight sometimes," Evan said. "Cash does not get tight by itself. That's exactly what I mean." He stood and walked to the window. "Every time you see one late invoice, you act like the floor is falling out." "One late invoice?" I placed the envelope on his desk. Then I lifted the catalog and pulled the 3 folders free. "You haven't opened any of these." His shoulders dropped. For a moment, he looked tired. Not lazy. Not careless. Tired. And that made it hurt more. "I know what they say," he said. "No, you don't." "I know enough. That is not the same thing." He turned around. "If I stop to stare at every bad number, Mom, I'll never be brave enough to build anything." He had said it before. This time I heard the fear underneath it. I softened my voice. "Then let me sit with you while you look." His face closed again. "No. Just one word. Not angry, not loud, but final." He opened the top drawer of his desk and dropped the folders inside. "I have a meeting," he said. "With whom?" "Tessa and a lender." The room seemed to shrink around me. "A lender? It's not a big deal. What kind of loan?" He rubbed his forehead. "A line of credit. For the showroom. We use it to finish the build-out, bring in higher-end clients, and then we pay it down once the sales start. Who is guaranteeing it?" He did not answer. I felt the old instinct rise in me. The one that had kept us alive through slow winters and broken equipment and customers who made promises they never intended to keep. "Evan," I said, "who is guaranteeing it?" He looked at the floor. "Tessa thinks you should." For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. "She thinks I should what?" "Sign a limited guarantee." The phrase sounded neat, respectable, like something harmless folded into a clean envelope. I had spent too many years around banks to believe in harmless paperwork. "A guarantee for how much?" "It's not finalized. That means you know." He picked up a pencil from his desk. Not mine. A cheap black plastic thing. He rolled it between his fingers. 150,000. The sound from the shop floor came through the walls. A saw cutting hardwood. A compressor kicking on. The familiar machinery of our lives. And suddenly I could hear every dollar underneath it. Payroll. Health insurance. Property taxes. Supplier balances. The rent on the small apartment Luisa's daughter shared with her baby. The mortgage payment on the home our finisher, Nate, had bought only 6 months earlier. "Absolutely not," I said. Evan's head came up. "You haven't even heard the terms." "I heard enough. You've already decided I can't do this." "I decided I will not put my retirement, my home, or the company property behind a loan I have not reviewed." "It's not just your company property." There it was. Not shouted. Not yet. But there. I looked at my son. "You're right," I said. "It isn't." He breathed hard through his nose. "I'm trying to make this place bigger than Dad left it. And I'm trying to make sure there is still a place to leave." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Tessa appeared in the doorway. She had changed out of her cream blazer. Now she wore jeans, heeled boots, and the expression of someone who had entered halfway through a conversation and already knew which side she was on. "Glenn needs an answer by Friday," she said. "He'll have one," I told her. "After I see the books." Tessa gave a little laugh. "The books are not the whole business, Marianne." "No," I said. "They are the part that tells you whether the rest is real." Her eyes sharpened. Evan stepped between us. Not physically, but somehow he did. "We'll talk later," he said. Tessa looked at him. Then she looked at me. "Fine," she said. "But we can't keep asking permission every time we try to move forward." I left before I said something I could not take back. At lunch, I took my sandwich to the small break room behind the finishing area. I did not eat it. I sat with the Carolina hardwood invoice open in front of me. That was when Luis came in. He poured himself coffee from the pot that had probably been warming since dawn. He took one look at my face and stopped. "You okay, Marianne?" I almost said yes. That is what women like me say first. Yes, I'm fine. Yes, I can handle it. Yes, don't worry about me. But I had been saying yes for nearly 2 years, and somehow the truth had kept getting worse. "Louise," I said, "has Carolina Hardwood ever threatened to stop deliveries?" He set his mug down, not slowly, not casually. "Who told you?" "So they have." He looked toward the closed door. "Twice," he said, "once last month, once the month before. I thought Evan was working it out." "And the crew?" "The crew knows we've had deliveries delayed." He paused. "They don't know why." I looked back at the invoice. $18,740. That number was no longer just a number. It was lumber that would not arrive, orders that would not ship, hours that would disappear from paychecks. Luis picked up the invoice but did not read it. He respected my privacy too much for that. Instead, he said, "Daniel used to tell us not to panic until the numbers told us to." I looked at him. "Daniel said that?" Luis nodded. Usually after he'd already panicked in private. Despite myself, I smiled. Daniel had hated numbers. He trusted me with them because they made him anxious in a way he never admitted to anyone else. Maybe that was why Evan's fear hit me so hard. He had inherited Daniel's hands, Daniel's eye, and apparently Daniel's instinct to look away when the figures turned ugly. But Daniel had trusted me enough to look with him. Evan was shutting the drawer. That afternoon, I returned to my office and opened the company's online banking portal. My password did not work. I tried it again. Then a third time. The screen flashed a message in calm blue letters. "Your credentials are no longer active. Contact your administrator." I sat very still. Outside my window, a forklift beeped as it reversed across the loading bay. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tessa. "We updated system access." Nothing personal. Evan will explain. Nothing personal. I stared at those two words until the screen went dark. Then I reached into my cardigan pocket and closed my hand around Daniel's brass-tipped pencil. For the first time, I did not feel pushed aside. I felt locked out. I drove home early that day. Not because I had finished my work, because I no longer had access to it. There is a particular kind of humiliation in being locked out of something you helped build. It is not loud. Nobody points at you. Nobody laughs in your face. You simply sit in the office where you once knew every password, every vendor code, every employee's birthday, and discover that a screen has decided you no longer belong there. By 4 o'clock, I had packed my purse, my reading glasses, and the yellow legal pad from my drawer. I left the rest. The framed photo of Daniel and me at the company's 25th anniversary stayed on the filing cabinet. The little ceramic mug Evan made in middle school stayed beside the coffee machine. Even my extra cardigan stayed on the hook behind the door. I did not want to make a scene. That was still my first instinct. Do not make it worse. Do not embarrass Evan. Do not give Tessa a reason to call you emotional. I had spent 2 years trying to be easy to manage. On the drive home, I passed the old diner where Daniel and I used to eat breakfast on Fridays. We would split pancakes, because neither of us had the sense to stop working long enough for lunch. Daniel always ordered bacon. Then he would complain about his cholesterol while stealing my syrup. I almost turned into the parking lot. Instead, I kept driving. My house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear the refrigerator hum and the clock ticking over the stove. I set my purse down on the kitchen table and stood there with my hand resting on the back of a chair. For a few minutes I did nothing. Then I went upstairs. The blue folder was in the hall closet behind the extra blankets. I knew exactly where it was. That is the part I need to be honest about. I did not discover Daniel's blue folder. I had known it existed for 7 years. I knew because I had helped him put it together. In 2014, our biggest commercial customer filed for bankruptcy 3 weeks after we had delivered nearly all the custom fixtures for a hotel renovation. We had paid our vendors. We had paid our crew. We had paid for lumber, hardware, freight, insurance. Then the customer disappeared into court filings and creditor meetings. We were left with a hole in the book so large I could feel it in my chest every time I opened the mailbox. Daniel wanted to borrow against the shop. I wanted to close the doors for a month, stop taking new work, and figure out what was left. We fought about it in whispers after Evan went to bed. Neither of us wanted our son to hear how scared we were. That was when Daniel called James Whitaker. James was not a flashy lawyer. He did not wear expensive-looking suits or speak in grand speeches. He had a soft southern voice, wire-rimmed glasses, and a habit of folding his hands over a legal pad before he said anything difficult. He helped us restructure the company. He helped Daniel separate the building from the operating business. and he helped us create the Cole Family Business Trust. At the time, I thought of it as a fire extinguisher behind glass. Something important. Something you hoped you would never need. Daniel named me voting trustee. The trust held 60% of the company's voting shares. Evan would inherit the economic value of those shares someday, but he would not control them until he met the conditions Daniel had written into the documents. At the time, Evan was 25. He had just graduated from design school. He was talented, restless, convinced he was already behind in life because other people his age had jobs in Chicago and New York and Seattle. Daniel loved him fiercely. That was exactly why he wanted guardrails. He needs room to grow, Daniel told me one night as we sat at the kitchen table signing documents. But he can't learn anything if we hand him the keys before he knows where the brakes are. I hated that conversation, not because Daniel was wrong, because I did not want to imagine a day when I might have to choose between protecting our son and protecting the thing we had built for him. When Daniel died 2 years ago, I opened the folder once. Only once. I sat on the floor of this same hallway, still wearing the black dress I had worn to meet with the funeral director. The house smelled like lilies and coffee from the people who had come to tell me how sorry they were. I read the first page of the trust. Then I shut the folder. I could not bear it. Evan was grieving his father. I was grieving my husband. The last thing I wanted was to stand between my son and the company he believed was his future. So I told myself I would wait. I would give him time. I would trust him. That evening, I carried the blue folder into my bedroom and laid it on the quilt Daniel's mother had made us when we got married. The folder looked almost absurdly ordinary. Blue cardboard, white label, Daniel's neat handwriting, Cole Family Business Trust, current. I sat beside it for nearly an hour before I opened it. Inside were the documents I remembered, the trust agreement, the operating agreement, a copy of the deed for the workshop building, minutes from meetings Daniel and I had attended with James and Ruth. Then underneath everything else was an envelope I had never opened. My name was written across the front. For Marianne, if the business ever feels like it is pulling our family apart. I touched the envelope, but did not open it. Not yet. First, I read the trust conditions. They were clear. Evan had to complete 36 continuous months as operations director without serious management or financial violations. He could not approve personal or owner-related expenses above $2,500 without written approval from me and Ruth. He had to provide quarterly financial reports within 15 days of each quarter ending. And he could not use company property as collateral or submit a loan application on behalf of the business without my written authorization as voting trustee. I read those pages slowly. Then I read them again. Evan had become operations director after Daniel died. 28 months, not 36. And I had not received a proper quarterly report in almost a year. My fingers went cold. I pulled out my phone and searched my email. There were messages from Ruth. Short ones, professional ones. Marianne, following up on Q4 reporting. Do you want me to copy Evan directly? Please call me when you have a moment. I had seen them. I had told myself I would deal with them after the holiday rush. Then after the January inventory count. Then after Daniel's birthday. Then after the showroom conversation. There is always a reason not to open the door you're afraid of. And while I had been finding reasons, Evan and Tessa had been building a wall. I opened the envelope. The paper inside had yellowed slightly around the edges. Daniel's handwriting slanted across the page, firm and patient. It was not a long letter. That was Daniel. He never used 10 words when 5 would do. He wrote that he hoped I would never have to use the trust against Evan. Then he crossed out the word against. Above it, he wrote 4. Use it for him, Marianne, not against him. My vision blurred. I pressed my thumb to the corner of the page until the paper bent. Below that, he had written one more thing. Do not give power to the loudest person in the room. Give it to the person willing to look at the numbers they are afraid of. I read that line until I could no longer see it clearly. Then I cried. Not the dramatic kind. No shaking shoulders. No sound. Just tears falling onto Daniel's handwriting while the evening light disappeared from the windows. After a while, I folded the letter back along its old creases. I did not feel strong. I did not feel like I had a plan. I felt 62 years old, tired, lonely, and afraid that if I opened this folder all the way, I would lose what remained of my son. But I also knew something else. The trust did not make me powerful. It made me responsible. The next morning I called Ruth Alvarez. She answered on the second ring. "Marianne," she said, "I was beginning to worry. I need to understand what has been happening in the company accounts." There was a pause. Not surprise. Not exactly, more like relief. "I think," Ruth said carefully, "we should meet in person." "When? Today?" I looked down at the blue folder resting on my kitchen table. For 7 years, it had been an emergency tool I prayed I would never need. Now it was open, and I had no idea what I was about to find. Ruth Alvarez had been our accountant for 29 years. She had seen Cole Custom Woodworks through late-paying contractors, a flood that ruined half our stored lumber, a recession, Daniel's first back surgery, and more tax seasons than either of us wanted to remember. She had never once raised her voice around me. That was why I knew something was wrong when she opened the door to her office and said, "Come in. Sit down. No coffee first. No small talk about the weather. Just sit down." Her office was on the second floor of a brick building near downtown Raleigh. Nothing fancy. A faded navy carpet, a framed print of the North Carolina mountains, a bowl of peppermints on the reception desk, probably the same kind we kept at the shop. Ruth's conference room had a long white table and a window overlooking a parking lot. She already had papers spread in front of her, not one stack, several. I sat down across from her, with Daniel's blue folder in my lap. Ruth wore a dark green blouse and square reading glasses. Her hair had gone silver at the temples over the years, but she still wrote everything important on a green legal pad in handwriting so small I could never read it without leaning in. She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "I'm glad you called. I should have called sooner." "Yes," she said, "no softness, not cruelness either. Just truth." I nodded. "I know." She slid the first document toward me. It was a cash flow report from the previous quarter. My eyes went straight to the red numbers. Accounts payable had climbed, not all at once. That would almost have been easier. It had risen in small steps. A late supplier balance here, a partial payment there, a credit card expense coded to marketing. Another vendor pushed to the next month. Then the next. "This doesn't make sense," I said. Ruth folded her hands. "It makes sense if the business is spending ahead of cash, on the showroom. Partly." That word settled heavily between us. "Partly." Ruth pulled over a second page. "Do you recognize the name Stone and Vale?" "No, it's a design firm out of Charlotte. Tessa hired them 6 months ago to develop the showroom concept, customer journey, brand package, and launch plan." I stared at the line item. 6 months ago? She used the company card. "How much?" Ruth hesitated. "Across 6 invoices, just under $26,000. The room went still. I thought of the warm beige samples, the brass lettering, the floating shelves. The rendering Tessa had shown us like it was a promise, $26,000 before a contractor had swung a hammer. And Evan approved this? He signed the vendor authorization. My hand moved to the brass pencil in my pocket. I felt its cool weight through the fabric. What else? Ruth did not answer right away. Instead, she opened a folder with a red tab. "This is the loan application package that Evan and Tessa prepared for Piedmont Community Bank." My stomach tightened. I looked down at the pages. There was Evan's signature. There was Tessa's digital initials beside several attachments. And there, in the projected revenue section, was a number that did not belong. They had listed the company's expected annual revenue as almost 30% higher than the previous year. Not a hopeful projection. Not an estimate marked as tentative. A number presented as if it were supported by signed contracts. "It isn't true," I said. "No." "Did the bank approve the loan?" "Not yet. They asked for more documents." Ruth tapped another page. "They also asked for a resolution authorizing collateral." "I thought Evan wanted me to guarantee the loan personally," I said. $150,000. Ruth shook her head. "The bank rejected that structure. Your income outside the company wasn't enough on its own to satisfy them. So they went back and offered the workshop instead. Company collateral, not a personal guarantee." That explained why no one had come back to ask for my signature. They had simply found a version of the loan that didn't need it at all. The workshop building. The land Daniel and I had protected during the 2014 crisis. The same building where Luis had spent 22 years leading crews, where Evan had learned to use a hand plane at 8 years old, where Daniel's fingerprints were probably still hidden under a dozen layers of finish. "They cannot use the shop as collateral," I said. "Not without you." Ruth's voice stayed calm. "But they may try to make the bank believe you are simply an inactive shareholder." I felt the blood leave my face. Inactive. That was what I had become to them. Not Evan's mother, not Daniel's partner, not even a person they needed to argue with. Just a box they hoped someone would forget to check. Ruth moved the next page toward me. "This is why I contacted you 3 times about the quarterly reports. 3 empty spaces: Q4 2024, Q1 2025, Q2 2025. No reports submitted to the trustee. No cash flow summaries. No schedule of owner-related expenses. Nothing." "They said they were still finalizing them," I said. "They said that in February." Ruth's expression changed then. Not anger, disappointment. "The business has 14 employees, Marianne. If this loan closes under the numbers they submitted, and the showroom does not generate immediate sales, payroll becomes vulnerable." I thought of Luis by the loading dock, of Nate in his new mortgage, of the young apprentice learning to keep his hands steady near the bandsaw. 14 people, 14 homes, 14 families who had not signed up to become collateral for my son's fear. "What can I do?" I asked. Ruth leaned forward. "You can exercise your authority as voting trustee, but I would urge you not to do it blindly or emotionally." "I don't feel emotional." Ruth gave me a look. "Marianne." I let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "I feel all of it," I admitted. "I just don't know which part to feel first. That is why we proceed carefully." She had already thought it through. Of course she had. Ruth had always been prepared before the rest of us knew there was a problem. She explained that we could request a limited independent audit of the company accounts, loan materials, and related party expenses. We could send formal notice to Evan and Tessa that no loan, lien, or collateral pledge had authorization from the voting trustee. We could ask the bank to pause the application while the company's governance documents were reviewed. None of it would happen in an afternoon. None of it would make the problem disappear. And none of it would feel good. But it would stop them from putting the building at risk, she said. "Yes, and it would protect payroll while we understand the full picture." "Yes." Ruth reached for her phone. "There is someone else you should talk to before you make any decision." I knew who she meant. James Whitaker arrived an hour later. He was older now. His hair was white, his posture slightly stooped, but his eyes were exactly the same. Clear, steady, impossible to rush. He shook my hand with both of his. "I wish I were seeing you under better circumstances," he said. "So do I." He sat beside Ruth, not across from me. I noticed that. He was not there to corner me. He was there to help me look at what I had avoided. James reviewed the trust provisions with me again. Not in legal language, in plain words. "You have a duty to the trust," he said. "That means you have a duty to preserve the company's long-term value for Evan. But it also means you cannot allow him to endanger it, simply because he is your son." The sentence landed hard. "I don't want to punish him." "Then don't." I looked at him. James tapped the blue folder. "Protection and punishment are not the same thing. Your husband understood that better than most people." I swallowed. He trusted Evan. He loved Evan, James said. That is why he gave him a path, not a crown. For the first time since I had opened Daniel's letter, I felt something inside me shift. Not rage, not satisfaction. A line. A quiet line between what I could forgive and what I was responsible for stopping. Ruth printed the formal notice to Piedmont Community Bank. James drafted a letter requiring that no collateral documents be accepted without trustee approval. Then Ruth began gathering account records, expense reports, and vendor files for the audit. I signed nothing that afternoon except the authorization for a limited financial review. My hand shook as I wrote my name. Not enough for anyone else to notice, enough for me. When I left Ruth's office, the sun was already low. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting it. Then my phone rang. Evan. I stared at his name on the screen. For one wild second, I thought he might be calling to say he was sorry, to say he had opened the reports, to say he wanted my help. But when I answered, his voice was flat. "Did you have Ruth call the bank?" I looked through the windshield at the empty parking lot. "Yes." A long silence. Then he said, "You had no right." I closed my eyes. "I had every right, Evan." "No," he said, "you had one job. Stay out of the way." The call ended. I sat there with the phone in my lap, and for the first time I stopped wondering whether I was overreacting. By Monday morning, the bank had placed the company accounts under dual approval. It was not dramatic. No alarms went off. Nobody's keycard stopped working. Nobody was escorted out of the building. At 8:12 a.m., a quiet email landed in Evan's inbox. Tessa's inbox, Ruth's inbox, and mine. Effective immediately. All electronic payments exceeding $1,000 require approval from the voting trustee and the company's outside CPA pending governance review. That was all. One paragraph. No accusations, no grand announcement. But before 9 o'clock, I knew Tessa had read it. Her heels struck the hallway outside my office in fast, sharp clicks. I was sitting at my old desk for the first time in nearly a week. Ruth had contacted the bank on Friday afternoon and restored my read-only access to the accounts as voting trustee. I could see what was coming in, what was going out, what was overdue. I could not undo what had already happened, but I could finally see it. Tessa pushed open my office door without knocking. Tell them to reverse it. I looked up from the screen. She had on a camel-colored coat, but she had not taken it off. Her cheeks were flushed. One hand held her phone so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. "Good morning, Tessa. Don't do that." "Do what?" "Act like this is normal." I glanced at the email open on my monitor. "It is a temporary control while Ruth reviews the accounts. You froze the business." "No. I added approval for payments over $1,000, which means we can't move. It means someone has to look at what is moving." Her laugh came out thin. "You are unbelievable." I had heard that phrase enough times in my life to know it rarely meant what people thought it meant. Usually it meant, "You are no longer doing what I expected you to do." Tessa stepped farther into the room. "The contractor needs $42,000 today. We miss this deadline. We lose the schedule. We lose the showroom. Do you have any idea how much work I put into that?" "Yes," I said. Ruth showed me the invoices. Her face changed. Not guilt. Not yet. Fear. "You went through my work?" "I went through company records. I built that plan. With company money. For the company. That remains to be seen." For a moment, I thought she might throw her phone. Instead, she turned toward the window, where the production floor spread beneath us. The shop was busy. Men and women moving between workbenches. Machines running dust, floating in the shafts of early sunlight. "This place is dying," she said. "You don't understand that because you think survival is enough." I studied her profile. Tessa was not entirely wrong. The shop needed new clients. It needed better systems. It needed someone to understand how people found businesses now. Daniel would have been the first to admit that. But wanting a future did not give her the right to gamble with everyone else's present. "The company is not dying," I said. "It is being asked to carry more than it can afford." She turned back to me. "You are afraid of change." "No, Tessa. I am afraid of unpaid payroll." That stopped her. Just for a second. Then Evan appeared behind her. He looked like he had not slept. His shirt was wrinkled. His jaw was dark with stubble. In one hand, he held a printed copy of the bank notice. "Can we talk?" he asked. Tessa turned toward him. "I've been trying." He did not look at her. He looked at me. I nodded toward the two chairs across from my desk. He sat. Tessa stayed standing. That told me more than either of them did. Evan placed the paper on my desk. "You didn't call me first. I called you Friday." "You called after you called the bank." "Yes." He looked down. "I was in a meeting." "You were with the lender." His eyes came up sharply. "So Ruth told you everything?" "Ruth told me what she was legally required to tell me." Tessa folded her arms. "This is exactly what I warned you about. She doesn't want you to run the company. She wants you to stay her little boy forever." I saw Evan flinch. He did not correct her. That hurt in a way I was not prepared for. "I don't want to run the company," I said quietly. "I want to know what is happening to it." "You know what is happening?" Evan said. "We're trying to grow." "No. You're trying to spend $42,000 while Carolina Hardwood waits for $18,740. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Tessa jumped in. "The supplier will get paid." "When?" "Once the showroom starts bringing in work." "The showroom does not exist yet." "It will," she snapped. The room fell silent. I looked from her to Evan. He had once been the boy who cried when he accidentally broke a lamp, not because he was afraid of being punished, but because he could not stand that something had been damaged by his own hands. I wondered when that boy had learned to look away. The answer came to me slowly. Maybe he had not changed all at once. Maybe I had just kept making it easier for him not to see. My decision stands, I said. No payment over $1,000 without Ruth and me approving it until the review is complete. Tessa's face hardened. And what about Evan? What about him? He's the operations director. Yes, you're stripping him of authority. No. I'm putting limits on authority while we determine whether it has been used responsibly. Evan stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. You don't trust me. The words were quiet. That made them worse. I stood too. No, I said. Right now I don't. Tessa stared at me as if I had slapped him. Evan looked down at the paper in his hand. For a moment, I thought he might say something honest. Something like, I'm scared. Something like, I don't know how to fix it. Instead, he folded the bank notice in half, then in half again. Fine, he said. You want control? Take it. He walked out. Tessa stayed a moment longer. You're going to regret this, she said. I already do. That afternoon, Ruth and I met with Luis in the break room. He came in with sawdust on his shoulders and his measuring tape clipped to his belt. He had not been told everything. I would not do that to him. Not yet, but I told him enough. We are conducting a financial review, I said. Payroll is protected. Production continues. There may be delays in purchasing until we get a clear picture. Luis listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at Ruth, then at me. What do you need from me? That question nearly broke me. Not because it was complicated. Because it was simple. Because it was the first question anyone had asked me in weeks that was not about what they could take. We need a list of every order currently in production, I said. What materials are on hand? What is due this month? And what can be delayed without hurting customers? Luis nodded. I can have it by tomorrow. Thank you. He started for the door, then paused. Marianne? Yes. Daniel trusted you with the hard part. I looked at him. Luis gave one small shrug. Guess it's your turn to trust yourself. After he left, I sat at the break room table with Ruth beside me. Outside, I could hear the shop working. The same sounds as always. Saw blades, sanders, forklifts. But I knew the people making those sounds were waiting on decisions I could no longer avoid. At 4:36 that afternoon, Ruth's phone rang. She looked at the screen, then at me. It's the bank, she answered. I watched her face as she listened. The color drained from it. When she ended the call, she placed the phone face down on the table. What is it? I asked. Ruth took a breath. Evan and Tessa attempted to send the $42,000 wire to Glenn Harper's company. My chest tightened. Attempted? The bank blocked it pending your approval. I closed my eyes. The money had not gone. Not yet. But the fact that they had tried without telling me changed something. I had wanted to believe they were simply overwhelmed. Now I knew they were willing to go around me. Ruth reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. We need to move faster, she said. I looked through the break room window at the shop floor. 14 people were still working. They did not know how close their paychecks had come to being gambled away, and I realized I could not protect Evan from the consequences of his choices anymore, not if it meant sacrificing everyone else. The audit took 6 weeks. That is the part people do not understand about crises. The decision to act can happen in one afternoon. The truth takes longer. Truth has to be printed, sorted, matched to bank statements, compared against invoices, explained by people who would rather not explain anything at all. For 6 weeks, Cole Custom Woodworks lived in a strange kind of suspension. The shop stayed open. Payroll went out every Friday. Louis brought Ruth a production report every Tuesday morning, written in his blocky handwriting on a clipboard he had owned for years. We delayed 2 projects that needed specialty hardware. We called customers before they called us. We offered revised delivery dates instead of excuses. Some were understanding, some were not, but nobody lost their job. That mattered to me more than I could say. Evan came in less often. When he did, he kept to his office. The dark gray door stayed closed. Tessa stopped coming to the shop entirely after the 2nd week. I heard things anyway, small things. One of the apprentices said he had seen Evan sitting in his truck after work with both hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Luis told me Evan had spent half a day on the floor helping repair a warped dining table instead of answering emails. I did not know what to make of that. Part of me wanted to believe he was finally seeing the work again. Another part of me was too tired to make hope out of scraps. Ruth and I met every Thursday afternoon. She never dramatized what she found. That was not her way. She brought facts, and facts, I learned, could be more painful than anger. The $18,740 owed to Carolina Hardwood Supply had not disappeared. It had been pushed. Tessa had delayed payment twice, then used money from a customer deposit to cover the first Stone and Veil invoice. She had believed the showroom launch would bring in enough new work to replace it before anyone noticed. The plan was reckless, but I could understand the thinking behind it. She had not wanted a nicer handbag or a vacation home. She wanted proof that she could turn our small company into something modern, something polished, something people in expensive offices would take seriously. The problem was that she had decided everyone else should carry the risk of her ambition. Then Ruth showed me the corporate credit card report. There were flights to Charlotte, hotel charges, meals at restaurants where the menus did not list prices, a deposit for a private launch event, $6,312.48. Every expense had been coded as client development. Every expense had been approved by Evan. I stared at the pages. Were these actual clients? I asked. Ruth removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly with a cloth. Some were prospective clients. One was Tessa's former college roommate, who works in commercial real estate. 2 were people from the design firm. And the rest? No documentation. I looked at Evan's signature on the approval form. It was unmistakable. The same hard downward line in the E. The same looping final N. My son's name. His choice. He knew, I whispered. Ruth did not try to soften it. He approved it. That was the difference. For weeks, I had told myself that Evan was overwhelmed, that Tessa had controlled the finances because she was more forceful, more organized, more willing to push a conversation past the point of comfort. But each time he had signed, he had made a choice. Maybe he had not opened every receipt. Maybe he had not asked enough questions. Maybe he had wanted so badly to believe the numbers would turn around that he treated his signature like a prayer. But he signed. And the truth was there in ink. The final report arrived on a rainy Thursday. Ruth brought it to my house instead of asking me to come downtown. She knew what it would mean. We sat at my kitchen table with the blue folder between us. Rain tapped against the windows. Daniel's old wind chime knocked softly against the porch railing. Ruth had divided the report into sections: vendor obligations, owner-related expenses, loan application materials, payroll forecast. There was no criminal accusation in it, no dramatic discovery of stolen millions. Just a pattern, missed reporting, unsupported projections, personal and business expenses mixed together, payments delayed without authorization, a proposed loan that could have put the workshop property at risk, and a cash flow forecast that showed something I had feared since the first red invoice. If the $42,000 wire had gone through, the company would have fallen short on payroll within 5 weeks unless new revenue arrived exactly when Evan and Tessa predicted. Exactly. Not probably. Not eventually exactly. 14 people were one bad assumption away from a missed paycheck. Ruth closed the report. There is enough here to suspend Evan's operational authority under the trust, she said, and to require repayment of unsupported owner-related expenses. My stomach turned. Suspend him. Temporarily, pending the trustee meeting and corrective plan. He'll here take everything away. Yes, Ruth said gently, he may. I looked at the rain running down the window. For 6 weeks I had imagined this moment. I had imagined feeling righteous, vindicated. I felt neither. I felt like a mother sitting beside a hospital bed, waiting to sign a paper she knew would save her child's life and break his heart at the same time. What happens to Tessa? I asked. She is not an officer or owner, Ruth said. Her company access can be removed. The company can demand documentation and repayment for unsupported expenses. James recommends we do not make accusations we cannot prove. We stick to the records. The records. I had spent my life trusting records. They had never once told me what to do with grief. James came over the next evening. He brought no briefcase, just the blue folder and a manila envelope containing a proposed corrective plan. Evan would lose signing authority pending the trustee meeting. Luis would oversee day-to-day production with Ruth handling financial controls. Evan could retain his economic interest in the trust, but his pathway to voting control would pause. Not end. Pause. To resume it, He would need to complete 36 months of documented operations work, submit reports on time, attend financial oversight meetings, and repay his portion of the unsupported expenses under a formal agreement. There was no easy way through. There was a way back. That mattered. What if he refuses? I asked. James looked at me with those steady eyes. Then he refuses. You cannot make him accept responsibility. I rubbed my thumb along the brass tip of my pencil. He'll say I chose the company over him. James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are choosing not to let him destroy both." The next trustee meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Evan and Tessa were formally notified. So was Luis. I hated that he had to be there. He had not asked for a place in our family's wreckage. But he had earned the right to know what would happen to the company he had given most of his working life to. The night before the meeting, Evan came to my house. I saw his truck through the kitchen window just after 8. For a moment, I did not move. Then he knocked. When I opened the door, he looked older than he had 6 weeks earlier. Not physically, something underneath. He held a damp envelope in one hand. "I need to talk to you," he said. I stepped aside. He walked into the kitchen and stood near the table where Ruth and I had spread the audit report. His eyes landed on the blue folder. "You found it," he said. "I always knew where it was." His mouth tightened. "You knew about that trust all this time?" "Yes." "And you didn't tell me?" "I thought I was giving you room." He laughed once. It was a broken sound. "You were waiting for me to fail." "No." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "Then why does it feel like you had this ready?" I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to tell him I was sorry for every time I had chosen silence because I was afraid of losing him. But I could not lie to make this easier. "Your father had it ready," I said. "Not me." Evan's eyes filled. He looked down at the envelope in his hand. Then he placed it on the kitchen table. "I didn't know about the loan numbers," he said. "Not all of them. I waited. Tessa told me she had the projections handled. I signed because I thought." His voice faded. "I thought if I pushed hard enough, I could make it true." The rain had stopped outside. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. I looked at the envelope. "What is that?" He swallowed. "Tessa's receipts. The ones she didn't give Ruth." My hand went still on the table. He pushed the envelope toward me. "She said you were trying to ruin us," he whispered. "But I read them. I did not open it. Not that night. Because sometimes the worst thing is not finding out someone betrayed you. Sometimes it is realizing they finally know it too." The trustee meeting was held in the conference room at James Whitaker's office. Not at the shop. I was grateful for that. The shop belonged to people who needed to keep working. I did not want the sound of saw blades and forklifts drifting through the walls while my family came apart. James's conference room was quiet and too cold. The walnut table ran nearly the length of the room. A glass pitcher of water sat in the middle, beside 6 empty tumblers. Gray light pressed against the windows. Outside, a few bare branches moved in the wind. Ruth sat to my right. James sat at the far end of the table with his legal pad and the blue folder. Luis sat beside Ruth, wearing his cleanest work shirt and the same old brown jacket he wore every winter. He had taken it off, but kept it folded over his knees. He looked uncomfortable. I hated that. Across from me, Evan sat with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Tessa sat beside him. She wore black from head to toe. Her lipstick was the color of red wine. She had an envelope on the table in front of her, thick with papers. For a moment no one spoke. Then James opened the blue folder. The sound of cardboard against wood was almost nothing, but every person at that table heard it. "Mr. Cole has not satisfied condition 1, James said. Evan stared at the folder. Tessa gave a short laugh. "That old thing," she said. "Daniel kept every paper he ever touched." Ruth slid one bank statement toward the center of the table. $18,740. The number sat there in black ink. Carolina Hardwood Supply. Past due. 47 days. Evan did not touch the paper. James turned a page in the trust document. "There are still 3 conditions left to discuss." Tessa's smile faded. "What is this?" she asked. "A trial." "No," James said. "It is a trustee review required by the governing documents of Cole Custom Woodworks. You're trying to make it sound official. It is official." Her eyes moved to me. "You set this up." I met her gaze. "No, your choices set this up." Evan exhaled slowly. "Can we please just get through this?" James nodded. That is precisely what we intend to do. He began with the condition Evan had failed first. 36 continuous months as operations director. Mr. Cole has served in that role for 28 months, James said. The trust requires 36 months before voting control may transfer. That is technicality, Tessa snapped. He has worked in that company his whole life. Not as operations director, James replied. He knows that business better than anyone. Lewis looked down at his folded jacket. I saw the small movement. Tessa did not. Evan spoke before I could. She's right, he said. I have worked there my whole life. James nodded once. No one is disputing your work history. The question is whether you have met the conditions your father set for control. Evan's jaw tightened. You never told me about those conditions. The words were directed at me. Not James, not Ruth, me. I know, I said. He looked at me. You let me believe the company was mine. The company is part of your future, I said. It was never supposed to be handed to you without responsibility. His face changed. Not anger. Not entirely. Hurt. And I had to let him feel it, because I had been avoiding that hurt for 2 years, and avoidance had brought us here. James moved to the second condition. The trust requires written approval for owner-related expenses over $2,500. Ruth opened a separate folder. She placed the corporate card statement on the table. Then the receipts Evan had brought to my house. The envelope Tessa had not known he found. One by one, Ruth identified the entries. Flights to Charlotte, 2 nights at the Carrington Hotel, dinner at a private club, a launch event deposit. Total unsupported owner-related expenses, she said, $6,312.48. Tessa's chair scraped backward. That is not personal spending. Then please provide the business purpose and client documentation, Ruth said. I did. Not for all of it, Tessa pointed at the receipts. Those meetings were for the showroom. Some were, Ruth said. 3 were attended by Stone and Vale employees. 1 was attended by a former college roommate. 2 have no guest records at all. Tessa turned to Evan. Tell them. He looked at the table. Tessa, tell them those were business meetings. His silence stretched. I watched her realize that he would not save her this time. They were supposed to be, he said finally. But I didn't see the receipts until last night. Her eyes widened. You went through my things? I opened the company envelope you hid in our closet. I did not hide anything. You put it under winter blankets. Tessa's cheeks flushed dark. You're siding with her now? Evan's voice broke on the next words. I'm trying to stop lying to myself. No one moved. Even James looked down at his notes. Tessa crossed her arms, but her hands were shaking. You think your mother is some saint? She said. She has controlled every decision since Daniel died. She never wanted us to have a chance. I could have answered that. I could have told her how many chances I had given them, how many reports I had not demanded, how many warning signs I had ignored because I was afraid of becoming the villain in my son's story. But James spoke first. This review is not about Marianne's character. It is about records. He turned another page. Condition 3 requires quarterly financial reports to be provided within 15 days of quarter end. Ruth placed 3 empty report covers on the table. Q4 2024, Q1 2025, Q2 2025. No report, no signature, no submission. Evan stared at them. I was working on them. You had 8 months, Ruth said quietly. I needed the numbers to settle. The numbers do not settle because we ignore them. He closed his eyes. I saw his shoulders sink. For the first time, I did not see the operations director or the angry son. I saw a frightened boy who had thought if he waited long enough, the bad part might pass him by. But bad numbers do not get tired. They wait. James rested his hand on the blue folder. There is one final condition. The room changed. Everyone felt it. No company property may be pledged as collateral, and no financing may be sought in the company's name without written authorization from the voting trustee. Ruth placed the loan application in front of Evan, then the wire request for Glenn Harper's $42,000 deposit. This application includes projections not supported by executed contracts, Ruth said. It also identifies the workshop property as proposed collateral. Tessa shook her head. Proposed, nothing was signed. The application was signed, Ruth said. Evan looked at the page. His name was there, his signature, the looping N. His hand lifted slightly, as though he might turn the paper over and make the words vanish. I thought it was preliminary, he said. It was sent to the bank, Ruth replied. Tessa turned toward him, fury and panic fighting across her face. You said you understood it. I said I trusted you. And now you're going to stand there and make me the bad guy? Evan's eyes filled. No, he said. I'm standing here because I was supposed to ask questions. That was the first honest thing I had heard from him in months. It did not repair anything. But it mattered. James opened the final document. The proposed resolution is as follows. Evan Cole's operational authority and signing authority are suspended pending completion of a corrective plan. Luis Moreno will serve as interim operations manager, with financial oversight by Ruth Alvarez and the voting trustee. Luis sat up straight, his eyes went wide. I don't know if you know the work, I said. He looked at me, I know the floor. That is where this company lives. James continued. The company will pursue repayment of unsupported expenses. Evan will retain his economic interest in the trust. His path to future voting control remains open if he completes the required 36 months of documented operations work, reporting obligations, financial oversight training, and the agreed repayment plan. Tessa laughed again, but there was no confidence in it now. So that's it? You get to take his career and give it to Luis? No, I said. Every face turned toward me. I picked up my brass-tipped pencil. For 37 years I had used it to write payroll numbers, supplier checks, tax estimates, and notes to Daniel. It had never once made a decision for me, but it reminded me that I could. I am not taking Evan's future, I said. I am refusing to gamble 14 other families on it. Evan looked at me. Tears stood in his eyes. I'm your son. I know. Then why does this feel like you're choosing them? Because they had not asked me to choose. Because they had trusted the company to keep its promises. Because love without a boundary had nearly cost us everything. But I did not say all of that. I only said, because being your mother does not mean I get to let you hurt people and call it love. The room was silent. Then James placed the resolution in front of me. My name was printed at the bottom. One signature. That was all it took. My hand shook when I picked up the pencil. I thought of Daniel's letter. Use it for him, not against him. Then I signed. Tessa stood so abruptly that her chair tipped backward. The crash against the wall made Luis flinch. You'll regret this, she said. Maybe I would. Maybe I already did. But I did not stop her as she walked out. Evan remained seated. He looked at the signature for a long time. Then he pushed the receipts toward Ruth. I'll repay my part, he said. Ruth nodded. That will be addressed in the agreement. He stood slowly. At the door, he paused. He did not turn around. I should have looked, he said. Then he left. The blue folder stayed open on the table, and for the first time since Daniel died, I understood that protecting someone sometimes meant letting them walk away without running after them. 3 months after the trustee meeting, Cole Custom Woodworks was still standing, not because the problem had magically disappeared, not because every customer had stayed, or because every overdue invoice had been easy to fix. We lost 2 commercial projects that year. One customer moved to a larger competitor. Another refused to accept our revised delivery schedule and canceled a dining room order we had already started. There were weeks when I went home so tired I could barely take off my shoes. There were days when I sat in my car outside the shop and had to talk myself into walking through the door. But payroll went out every Friday. Carolina Hardwood Supply was paid in full. The $42,000 showroom wire never went through. The showroom did not happen. At least not the showroom Tessa had imagined. Instead, Luis turned the unfinished front room of the shop into a small client space with materials we already had, reclaimed oak shelving, a long maple table from an overstock order, warm lamps he found at a restaurant liquidation sale, and a wall of finished samples that our apprentices helped mount. It was modest. It was beautiful. And it did not cost us our future. Luis never called himself operations manager unless someone forced him to. He would shrug and say, I just make sure people know what job comes next. But he did more than that. He started a weekly production meeting every Monday morning. No fancy presentation, no polished branding. Just a whiteboard, a thermos of coffee, and a list of what needed to happen before Friday. For the first time in months, people knew what was expected. And because they knew, they could breathe. Ruth still came every Thursday. She and I sat in the old conference room at the shop, with the cash flow report between us. I had returned to my office, though I had replaced the old computer and changed every password myself. Not because I wanted control, because I had finally learned the difference between trust and neglect. Trust required attention. It required questions. It required the willingness to look at a number even when you were afraid of what it might say. Tessa was gone by then. She moved out of the house she shared with Evan about 2 months after the trustee meeting. I did not ask for details, and Evan did not offer them. Through attorneys, the company reached a repayment agreement for the unsupported expenses. Tessa made the first payment, missed the second, and eventually signed a settlement that allowed the company to close the matter without dragging everyone through court. There was no dramatic victory, no police car, no handcuffs, just paperwork, consequences, and a debt that would take time to clear. Some endings are quieter than people expect. They are still endings. Evan did not return to the shop. At first, he stopped answering my calls. Then he stopped reading my messages. I sent him one text every Sunday for nearly 2 months. I love you. I am here when you are ready to talk. No questions, no guilt, no updates about the business he had lost the right to run. Just the truth. On the 9th Sunday, he responded, "I'm not ready, but I got a job." That was all. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I'm glad." Later, I learned he had taken an entry-level estimating position with a commercial millwork company across town. He was 32 years old, had once expected to inherit voting control of a family business, and was now reviewing subcontractor bids for someone else. It was not the future he had planned. Maybe it was the one he needed. I did not know. I only knew that some lessons arrive too late to prevent the damage, but not always too late to prevent more. One Tuesday afternoon in October, I was helping Louise choose stain samples for a large dining table order when the front door opened. The little bell above it gave its cheerful ring. I turned. Evan stood just inside the client room. He looked different, not transformed, not suddenly healed. He wore work boots with dust on them and a plain blue jacket that was too thin for the weather. He had lost some weight. His hair needed cutting. In his hands, he carried a rolled set of drawings. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Louise looked between us, then quietly gathered the stain samples. "I'll be in the back," he said. Evan waited until he was gone. "I brought something," he said. "I can see that." He gave a small, nervous smile. It disappeared quickly. "I got my first repayment statement from the company today." I nodded. The automatic transfer went through. "Yes, it isn't much. It is a start." He looked down at the drawings. "I know." The words hung between us. Then he walked to the maple table and unrolled the pages. They were plans for a bench. Simple, solid, a long seat with clean joinery and a curved brace underneath. The kind of bench you might see outside a school or a community center. At the top, in Evan's handwriting, were the words, "Apprentice Project, Cole Custom Woodworks. I designed it for the training program," he said. "Something the apprentices could build together. They could donate it to the vocational school." I looked over the drawings. The proportions were good. The joinery was smart. Daniel would have studied it quietly, then pointed to one small detail and said, "What happens if the wood moves?" I could hear him so clearly that my chest ached. "It's a good design," I said. Evan swallowed. "I'm not asking to come back." I waited. "I know I haven't earned that." My eyes stung. There it was, not an excuse, not a demand, a fact. He placed his hands flat on the edge of the maple table. "I just thought maybe the shop could use it." For a moment I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him he could come in tomorrow, take his old office back, and let us pretend the last year had been a terrible misunderstanding. But that would have been for me. For the part of me that still wanted my son close enough to protect. Not for him, and not for the people who had trusted us to do better. So I folded the drawings carefully. Then I handed them back. "Bring them to Luis," I said. Evan blinked. "He decides what the shop can build now." He nodded slowly. His mouth trembled, just once. "Okay." He picked up the drawings. At the door, he turned. "Mom?" "Yes?" "I am sorry." The words were small. They did not fix the late invoices, the blocked wire, the fear in Luis's face, or the way I had sat alone in my kitchen holding Daniel's letter. But I believed they were real. "I know," I said. He nodded. Then he walked through the front door and out into the cold October afternoon. I did not run after him. I stood beside the maple table until the bell stopped moving. A few minutes later, Luis came back into the client room. "Well?" he asked. I looked toward the door. "He has a design for an apprentice bench." Luis raised his eyebrows. "Any good?" I thought of the clean lines on the page, the careful brace, the little note Evan had added about letting each apprentice sign the underside before the bench was delivered. "Yes," I said, "it's good." Luis reached for the drawings. "I'll take a look." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the shop alone. The lights were low. The air smelled like cedar and varnish. On one workbench sat an unfinished chair, its legs clamped in place. On another, a young apprentice had left behind a pencil line where he had measured twice before cutting once. I stopped beside Daniel's old workbench. The surface was marked with years of use, tiny grooves, burn rings, dents from tools set down too hard. Not perfect, still strong. I took Daniel's brass-tipped pencil from my pocket and laid it on the bench. Then I turned off the lights. If you have ever loved someone enough to want to rescue them from every consequence, then you know how hard it is to step back. But sometimes love is not the hand that pulls someone out of every fire. Sometimes it is the boundary that keeps the whole house from burning down. And sometimes, much later, it is leaving the door unlocked, not because the past is forgotten, but because the future still has to be earned.